I'm Scott Ott, and this is Bill Whittle Now. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo announced this week that the United States will pull out of the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, the treaty with Russia signed in the Reagan administration that's supposed to guarantee force cutbacks in short-range nuclear weapons and medium-range nuclear weapons, mostly in Russia and Eastern and Western Europe. Bill, Pompeo said he gave a warning in December. Russia ignored the warning. Russia says we're not violating the treaty. 60 days has passed, and now this will trigger the next event, which is a 6-month waiting period before the U.S. can actually withdraw from the agreement. Bill, with the Doomsday clock from the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists now set to 2 minutes before midnight, closer than it's ever been. That is true.
Really?
Don't you think this is an exceedingly non-propitious time to pull out of a nuclear forces treaty?
Closest than it's ever been. Is that really true?
I am looking at the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists right here on their own website. A new abnormal. It says it is still 2 minutes to midnight.
And it's been 2 minutes to midnight for 70 years now?
Well, the last update I heard was just a couple of weeks ago when they updated it to 2 minutes to midnight.
Before that, it was probably 3 or 4 minutes
Maybe
to midnight.
Maybe 2.5.
Yeah, okay. Well, that tells us a lot of things, doesn't it? First of all, it tells us, and I'm sorry, who puts out the
it's on the website for the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists.
The Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, okay. Well, I'm pretty sure that not many of the atomic scientists worked on the actual original bomb, but we'll put that aside for a second. I'm not sure I'm going to actually do work on nuclear weapons, and I think that's germane to the discussion, but we'll put that aside too. First of all, I think that the 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes to midnight thing is as clear an example of this kind of scientific community's hysteria in terms of trying to gin up enough fear and agitation in the American population to match their own. And it's been very effective for the first, 20 or 30 years. I remember in the 70s and maybe even into the 80s when the Bureau of Atomic Scientists moved the minute clock 1 minute closer to midnight as if, we were going to be destroyed in February. Now it's heading our way in, late December. It's a meaningless barometer of something that cannot be measured. Actual risk is a real deal. I'm not ridiculing risk. I'm ridiculing the idea that a bunch of scientists who claim to have no political agenda are advancing the hands to a point where they've never been closer to the imminent destruction of both civilizations.
Well, Bill, I'll grant you that the
because
atomic
Donald Trump is about to walk out of a treaty.
I was going to say the atomic scientists, I grant you, will never say that it's just 3 PM and time for tea.
That's right.
However,
okay, but go ahead.
That said, even if Russia is violating the INF treaty, wouldn't it make sense to say, despite the fact we know that they're doing stuff like this, the stasis and stability that these treaties have provided over the past decade since the Reagan administration have been worth it, even though we know Russia's going to cheat a little?
Aha! Well, now we're on to the main vein, and I'm glad you got me off of that other sidetrack, Scotty. This is the progressive attitude towards everything, and that is get an agreement and then let the other party cheat on it, and this is the progressive attitude towards international negotiations, which is perfectly paralleled by the progressive attitude towards parenting, by the way, which is to say, if you eat another cookie, you're going to bed now and you don't get to go to the Justin Bieber concert. And you stand there and watch as this child eats this cookie right in front of you. I'm serious, young man. One more bite. That's it. That's it. I mean it. If you take one more cookie out of that jar, and it becomes a mockery, and everybody knows it. So, look, we saw Barack Obama elected in 2008, and right before that, month before that, Vladimir Putin invades the sovereign nation of Georgia. And we didn't do anything about it. And then he basically had a revolution fostered in the Ukraine, and we didn't do anything about that either. And then he's been doing these provocative things all over the place, and we haven't done anything about it. So what on earth makes people think that Vladimir Putin will not continue to do whatever the hell he wants to do because he knows that the United States will not do anything about it? Far from being a warlike act on the part of the Trump administration, and far from being something that's about to provoke a serious, an international crisis far greater than the Cuban Missile Crisis, This is exactly how you handle bullies and dictators, is you basically make it clear to them, okay, we said we were nice guys, you shook hands, you're obviously going back on your deal. Here's going to be the first set of consequences, which are sanctions. Here's going to be the second set of consequences, which are going to be removal of this treaty. And here's going to be the third set of consequences. And you can continue to play that game so long as you're consistent and resolute in what your position is. If you do not allow for negative consequences or continuing, or let me rephrase that, escalating negative consequences for escalating bad behavior, then he will have, very rightly, in the case of the last administration, concluded that we're a bunch of weak dupes who live in an ivory tower world of nuclear scientists setting a clock back 2 minutes, and rather than in the actual real world of what is necessary to contain people with very grandiose territorial ambitions.
Now, Bill, I could easily see people on the left making the argument that the Trump administration is choosing this time to do this. And they might say, on the eve of the revelation of the Mueller probe results, that President Trump wants to look strong vis-a-vis Russia in the face of accusations that he was complicit with Russia and that they may have actually helped him get elected.
Haven't we been on the eve of the revelation of the Mueller results for 2 years now, Scott?
It's been a long night.
No, it has been a long night, hasn't it? Because I seem to remember that we've been on the eve of the Mueller revelations for well over 2 years now. And to say that Trump is soft on Russia, as most people know, I got married 2 years ago, married a Russian woman who you've met, and that was another attempt of the Russians made to throw the election in favor of Donald Trump. And it worked really well because I worked real hard on that. But with all the sarcasm that this kind of story deserves put aside for a minute, I have firsthand knowledge of somebody who has not only many friends and relatives living in Russia, lived through Russia through the first set of sanctions, lived through Russia through the end of the Soviet era. And the sanctions that Donald Trump has put on Russia are far more severe than the ones that Obama put on Russia. And the ones that Obama put on Russia hurt the Russian people very deeply. And so basically this is a game of chicken where Vladimir Putin has decided he needs to... I understand Putin's position. I'm pretty sure I do. I think that Putin inherited what was once the second greatest power in the world, reduced to a laughingstock under Boris Yeltsin, to the degree where they wouldn't even get invited to conferences and they'd be ignored in the hallways and just literally just laughed at, openly scoffed and mocked while they had this drunkard running around. Vladimir Putin comes to Russia, comes to power at elections, although elections are certainly not the same as elections here, although God knows we're trying here very hard to get them there, and says, look, I'm going to make Russia great again. He said this 15, 20 years ago. The reason Putin is so bellicose is because I think he understands that this is one strategy, and it's often a very good strategy, for the person with the far weaker hand to appear so dangerous and so unpredictable that you better leave him alone, because he could just simply go right off the rails. Hitler did the exact same thing. Hitler's entire strategy was sound reasonable, act reasonable, do outrageous things, and then count on the weakness of democracies in peacetime to simply let it slide.
Now, Bill, Putin and his people are denying that he is in breach of this treaty. And the reason I bring that up is because the Democrats and the people on the left could easily say, look, the Russians say they're not doing it. It's not the Soviet Union anymore. It is a democratically elected government in Russia. And let us not forget that in Iraq, we said that there were nuclear weapons and violations by Saddam Hussein, but none ever turned up, and those have been widely discredited now. So why shouldn't we give Russia the benefit of the doubt and not destabilize the other superpower or one of the other superpowers in the world?
We're not destabilizing the relationship. He's destabilizing the relationship. We didn't decide one day to wait.
The State
Department
says
me and says anybody who's got the intelligence of Mike Pompeo to be able to say, listen, do you think that name me one reason why you would simply just come out with something like this? It's an absurd allegation, and those people who are saying Trump's doing it to look tough on the Russians are the same people who invented the entire Russian case in the first place. The Russian allegations are the biggest case of a dog biting its own tail that I've ever seen. They make the allegations, then they investigate the allegations, they make new allegations and investigate those, and nothing ever happens because nothing did happen. But put all that aside for a minute. This is a rational government. It's still hard to believe in this day and age, but the United States of America, like France and Britain and Canada and the rest of these countries, are in fact stable, prosperous, relatively reasonable countries. That's why I don't lose a lot of sleep over the fact that France has hundreds of nuclear weapons, and so does Great Britain. I'm not too terribly worried about a nuclear attack from France or Britain because they're reasonable people. Now, as you move down the scale of a lack of reasonableness, you get down to where Vladimir Putin is. Putin has taken what was once the second greatest superpower in the world. He inherited the second greatest superpower in the world, and he is still not got. Russia is still not one of the top 10 economies on the planet. It's not one of the top 10, Scott. So he has ambitions and he has designs and he has desires and all the rest of it. He's dealing with not only the world's biggest economy in terms of the United States, he's got the world's second biggest economy on his borders. I'm not defending him, far from it. Far from it. He's caused his people enormous amounts of suffering because of his adventurism. He sees this as the best way to defend Russia's interest, and I suspect what he's doing is rattling every saber that he's got to keep people afraid of him while he tries to consolidate some territorial gains.
Well, Bill, in fairness
to say that we just unilaterally just chucked it, and it's just nuts, Scotty.
In fairness to President Trump, he's not gone all cowboy like former President Bush, because he actually has full support from his NATO allies in the way that they are dealing with Russia in this INF
dispute. Imagine.
Now, let me ask you, though. So full support from NATO allies. The Republican Party is, of course, with the president on this. The Secretary of State comes out and says we are definitely going to follow through on our threat to pull out of this treaty. If you're Nancy Pelosi or the leaders of the Democratic Party, how do you address this apparent international unity behind this move?
Well, you can't, which is why they're making absurd statements like Donald Trump is destabilizing the peace. He's not destabilizing the peace. The Russians are destabilizing the peace. And the fact that the entire NATO alliance, none of which are particularly fond of Donald Trump, if memory serves. In fact, I think our principal ally in the alliance, Great Britain, seriously considered passing legislation that would not allow the President of the United States to enter their country. So if the Russians also have Trump under their boot, then they've also got the entire British government, French government, German government, all the other governments under their boot. All of the members of the NATO alliance are under the secret control of the Russians, which sounds like something a progressive would believe. But this business about the international agreement goes to back up my claim. I didn't know it when I made it, but I was fairly confident that I was right, that these kind of actions are not taken by the United States or any other responsible nation that is not seeking territorial gain. They are done in response to provocations. And if they're not done in response to provocations, then the provocations will not just continue, but they will escalate. And then it starts to get dangerous.
Well, the provocations will continue right here on Bill Whittle Now. I being the provoker, Bill being the one who must stand and deliver on his principles in the moment. We appreciate those members at BillWhittle.com who make this show possible. If you'd like to become one of their league, go to BillWhittle.com and click Become a Member. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members of BillWhittle.com for making this possible.